Okay, thank you everyone for joining the webinar, Hiring Throughout the Startup Life Cycle with Stephen Rothberg. So this is our featured webinar for today. The agenda, vision and values of Founders Network, and I'll give you some updates from the headquarters as well. And then we will do with the presentation with Q&A with Stephen Rothberg. So the Founders Network vision, authenticity, reciprocity, humility, inclusivity. These are the 4 pillars that we value here at Founders Network. Thus our slogan, lifelong success through peer mentorship. And the 2 initiatives that we have that embody those 4 pillars are the Black Founders Initiative, headed by Kyrie Kemp, and the Women's Leadership Initiative, headed by Amy Wister. This is just a sample of our demographic and stats. 78% is men here, women founders, and 22% is represented by women founders. And these are the people that also embody those 4 pillars that I earlier mentioned. We have the lifetime members here at Founders Network. They stick with us and we stick with them, like Dr. Narisa, Sophie, Darko, David Plonsky, Peter, Heather, Rohit, and Samir Gupta. And we'd like to thank our partners from the global and national, the regional, and also our community partners. Peer Mentor of the Week. These mentors are those people that also model those 4 core values: authenticity, reciprocity, humility, and inclusivity. William Lawson is our Peer Mentor of the Week. He is part of the June 22 cohort, and he's the founder at Accomplish, and he is able to present these values in our forum and also in our events like this one. Upcoming functions. On June 15, we will have the in-person lasagna party with our FN Silicon Valley chapter. We have the webinar, Investor Insights, on June 15. On June 27 is the FN Fund Demo Day and FN Boost. These are the events that we have in the future. And on June 21, we always have the Global Keynote monthly, and the next one will be on June 21 with Dave Ross. So save the date. This also are in our Eventbrite. If you're a guest, you can go to our Eventbrite page and log in and register. We also have our FN deals here at Founders Network, including Candidate, Brex, Closed Segment, Notion, and so if you're a guest, you have a comp guest pass, and what we ask is that you participate in the Q&A. We do that like 10 minutes before or after Stephen Rothberg do his talk. And we also have FN curriculum like this one, chapter events. We have virtual and also in-person. And of course, the global keynote that I earlier mentioned, which will be happening on June 21. Take the pledge. Founders Network is partnered with Pledge and Fin, so you can scan this QR code. I'll be sending the link as well on chat after this presentation. So for today, Stephen Rothberg, founder of College Recruiter, is our featured speaker for today, hiring throughout the startup life cycle. We're excited for this one. So Stephen Rothberg is the founder and chief visionary officer of College Recruiter, which believes that every student and recent graduate deserves a great career. Its customers are primarily Fortune 1000 companies and early career opportunities that require 0 to 3 years of experience. Each year, College Recruiter helps more than 30 million find great new jobs. That's exciting. So we have 4 things to cover for today. Number 1 is how to write an ad that attracts well-qualified leads, how and when to delegate hiring in a startup life cycle, and how to create fair workplace policies. And the last one, how to transition from 1,099 contractors to W2 employees. So Without further ado, let me present to you our featured speaker for today, Stephen Rothberg. Stephen?
Thank you, Paul. I assume you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, I am just gonna share my screen. And okay, looks like we are good. So yeah, so I thought what I could do to in today's session is to share some of what we've learned at College Recruiter. We're a fairly small company. We've been around for a long time though. So I definitely would not call us a startup. I started the business in 1991. At any given time, we have roughly 20 employees, contractors, et cetera. When I started the company, and for a long time, there were just a few of us. So we've definitely gone through that growth from 1 employee to 2 to 5 to 10 to 20. And I think that a lot of the founders here are probably in a similarly sized organization. But a lot of our customers, employers that advertise jobs with us, they are larger. Some of them are growing rapidly, but they're going from 20 to 50 employees or 50 to 250. And some of them have hundreds of employees, but would still be regarded as a small business. Some of them have thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands. And if there's a takeaway from the beginning of the session, it's that what a tiny little business with 1 or 2 or 3 employees can and should be doing is really different than an organization with, say, 20 employees. And that's really different than 50, 200, 2,000, 20,000, 200,000. So sometimes we as founders get pressure from bankers, investors, family, friends, whatever, to have like this big infrastructure, employee handbooks and all of that kind of stuff. And we're like, whoa, wait a second, I'm the employee. Why do I need a handbook if I'm the only employee? And fair enough. And so what I'd like to do in the first part of the presentation is kind of paint a picture of what that organization, what you should be doing in the HR talent acquisition space, what you should be doing at sort of different sizes. There are going to be lots of variations, industry to industry, geographic area to geographic area, and how fast you're growing, if at all. But I think it provides kind of a decent yardstick. What are the things that we should be looking at if we're going to go from 20 employees to 50 in the next year, for example? What does a 50-person organization look like in terms of HR that we as a 20-person organization just don't need today, but will say a year from now? And then definitely, like Paul was talking about, getting into job ads, workplace fairness policies, things like that, that are not only about compliance, complying with laws so that you don't get sued, prosecuted, or whatever, but also doing the right things for your current employees and future employees so that you can recruit and retain the talent that you need. So just for some context, what is College Recruiter? So our mantra, our mission, if you will, is that we believe that every student and recent graduate deserves a great career. We're a job search site, so think Indeed, Monster, Career Builder, LinkedIn, Adzuna, Talent.com, et cetera, where employers advertise their job openings. What makes us a little bit different from those ones is that they're all what would be called general job boards, or some people might call them recruitment marketplaces. In other words, candidates of all different industries, all different levels of experience can successfully use those sites to find part-time jobs, seasonal, internship, entry-level jobs that require 5+ years of experience, et cetera. We are what's called a niche site, or for some of my American listeners, niche sites. And what that means is that we focus, and there are loads of job boards out there that are niche sites, but to be a niche site, you're going to focus on a particular industry, engineering, for example, a geographic area. That might be a country, might be a metro area. Sometimes it's even a neighborhood. And for us, it's the education years of experience, early career, 0 to 3 years of experience, people who have at least some college or university education, often a degree, sometimes a master's degree. As Paul was mentioning, about 13 million candidates use our site a year. We have about 3 million ads running on our site at any given time. We're global, we're multilingual, we're multi-currency, and the jobs that you'll see are just sort of all different kinds for that more early career experience. Another thing that makes this a little bit different, not so much in the US, Canada, the UK, but most of the rest of the world, is that our employer customers, when they buy a job posting ad from us, unlike a traditional job board where you pay, say, $200 for 30 days or 200 euros or 200 pounds or whatever the currency might be for a 30-day ad, with us, almost all of our customers advertise on a cost per click basis. Candidate sees the ad on our site, they click the apply button, and they go over to the employer's application page that's usually hosted on the employer site, or even cost per application. And I mentioned that because it's helped us gain a lot of insight into what is producing a good return on investment from employers when it comes to things like including video in their postings, descriptions of the company, painting a picture of who your teammates would be. All of those have a massive impact, and I'll get to those in more detail later in the presentation. So the first half or so of the presentation, I'm going to kind of walk through the different sizes of organizations and what is important for a small organization, what becomes more important as you grow to a couple of dozen, and then dozens, and then hundreds. And particularly in light of the people who I think are by and large on the call, founders. What does it mean to you personally? What does it mean to your organization? And then roughly the last half, talk about job ads. There's a lot of misconceptions, bad information out there written by people who don't really know what actually causes a job ad to perform well versus one that doesn't perform well. Because of the volume that we do and the fact that we're global, we see this every single day, and we can sort of figure out why one job ad is working a lot better than another, and I'm going to share that with you. We're going to talk about fair workplace policies, again, from a perspective of recruitment and retention. It is the right thing to do, but I'm also going to, I think, hopefully share with you why it also makes business sense to do. And then one of the big struggles that a lot of founders have as they grow from just themselves to, say, 2 people, 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, is to transition from only hiring or employing contractors to having employees. In the US tax code, contractors are called 1099s, and employees that are on your payroll, those are called W-2s. So for those not in the US, if I refer to 1099s, I'm talking contractors. If I refer to W-2s, I'm talking employees, but it's a lot of the same issues and virtually the same globally. So first employee, this is what I had for the first 2-3 years of running the business. I was the only employee of the organization. And for the first year and a half, it was a sole proprietorship. It was not even incorporated. This is back in 91, 92. A lot of people will refer to these as SOHO, small office, home office. These organizations overwhelmingly are home-based, where you have one employee who's also the owner. Often the formalities of running a business are just not there. They're operating the business out of their personal checking account. They're using Gmail. They don't have a website, or they do have a website, but it's like a site that you would build using some tools like from GoDaddy or WordPress or something like that. And depending upon the kind of business, there is nothing wrong with any of that, but it doesn't scale. So if you want to start to really grow your business and increase your revenues from 0 to 50,000, then to 500,000, and to 5 million, et cetera, you have to start hiring people. One person just can't do it all. And when you start to hire people, that's when you start to get into some of the formalities. So the hiring early on, when you go from one employee, just the founder, to 2 to 5 to 10, overwhelmingly for most organizations, that is done by the founder. It is unlikely that the founder is actually good at that. What the traits that cause people to start their own business is usually a greater acceptance of risk than the general population. It's usually that they are better strategic thinkers, thinking out a year, 5 years, 10 years from now. They have the vision that sort of the ordinary employee doesn't share. They tend to be more tactical. The founders tend to be more creative and less process driven. They tend to get annoyed or deflated by having to do a lot of rote grunt tasks, and they would rather be creating than creating the product than actually making the product is typical for a founder. All of the things that are really important to properly hiring people, to really knowing what that role encompasses, what skills and characteristics you want to have in that person. Are they likely to be with you for 3 months or 3 years or 30 years? Those are the very things that founders tend to be weak at. So one thing that tends to happen with organizations early on is that founders have a very poor hiring process. They tend to place too much value on knowing the person, on entrusting them. So it results in people hiring their brothers, their first cousins, their next door neighbors, their spouses, their kids, their parents. And those are often the worst people that you can hire, because if they don't work out, and chances are they won't forever, almost all employees leave after a period of months or a few years. It's really hard to fire your dad. It's really hard for your first cousin to quit and to leave you in a lurch. Your company, your organization is a separate entity from you. And so you need to treat it separately. The fact that you want to work with your sister doesn't mean that your sister is the proper person for your company to employ. You want to spend more time with your sister? Awesome. Go for drinks, go for dinner, maybe even go for walks every day, but it doesn't mean that your sister should be the person working for your company. Now, there are loads of exceptions to that. For example, a couple of years after I started the company, I got married. My wife started to work part-time in the business pretty quickly. And then after, I think it was something like 8 or 9 years, she became a vice president full-time in our company. Then she became our CEO. Her background, her skill set actually made that work really well. So she's started to work for our company and then moved up, not because we were married, but because she had the right skill set. Now, if we were to have marital problems, if the company were to have problems and the answer was for her to go or for me to go, that would definitely be a lot harder because of the personal relationship. So I caution founders, whenever possible, you do not want to hire your high school buddy, your spouse, your sister, your cousin. It usually ends up leading to bad outcomes more than it helps. Cultural fit. How well am I going to get along with this person? Can I delegate stuff to them? Can I trust them to get it done? Am I always going to get into arguments? Is this person going to be willing to take on work that isn't really part of their job description? Those are really, really key characteristics of early employees. So early employees tend not to be specialists. They tend to be generalists. So think Swiss Army knife. You've got one tool that can do 10 different things. That's what a founder should want in very early employees, because what you think you're hiring that person for the first week or month likely is going to change within a few months, certainly within a year. And rather than having to replace that person, much better for that person to be able to adapt, obviously with your help, get the training they need, move into different areas of responsibility. If they stay with you for a long time, they and you will naturally recognize that their skills just tend to gravitate more to one thing than another. You might have hired that person as sort of your right hand. And over time, as you add employees, you find out that they're really, really good in operations, in sort of keeping the show running on a day-to-day basis, or they might be really good financially, and they end up becoming your bookkeeper, your controller, your chief financial officer, etc. For most small organizations where they're going from one employee, the founder, to 2 to 5 to 10, they usually have very little money to advertise job openings. Most of them have not yet received angel funding, venture capital funding. They may never get that kind of outside investment. And so when you're running a job posting ad, what I find with most of those really small organizations is that they tend to look for free options. Post a job for free to LinkedIn, post a job for free to Indeed, etc. If you're looking to hire one person, I would encourage you to do that. Run those ads for free. We've done that. We've done that successfully. I would pay for advertising, however, when you get to that point where your time is more valuable than your money. And so if it's going to take you 4 days to post that ad at a whole bunch of sites for free, and you only get a couple of applications and they're not well suited to your role, that's expensive. Your time is worth a lot of money. That's when you want to start pulling out that checkbook, credit card, whatever, and spend a couple $100 on buying a job posting ad, whether it's a general site or a niche site. That's kind of another story for another day. It really depends on the volume and the kinds of people that you're looking for. If people want suggestions for where to advertise their job openings, not really this topic, feel free to shoot me an email or connect on me with me on LinkedIn, and I can give you some hints on that. The other thing that tends to happen with these micro organizations is that their hiring process is really unstructured, and their onboarding, once you've hired that person and getting them to their first day, their first week, their first few months, tends to be even more unstructured. Winging it is kind of a phrase that comes to mind. You might interview 5 people. You have no set questions. You come in, maybe you meet at a Starbucks or someplace like that, and you just kind of have a conversation, and you don't really have in mind, these are the 12 questions that I need to ask. I'm only going to ask those 12 questions. I'm going to allocate half an hour to my questions, half an hour for the candidates' questions. It's unstructured. Instead, you're just kind of like going at it like you were at a cocktail party. The problem with that is that when you start to ask different questions of different candidates, if you ask even the same question but worded a different way or in a different order, or your tone is different, then at best case scenario, you're creating unconscious bias. You are going to maybe ask a woman a question or phrase it one way, and a man with basically the same background, you might ask them that question in a different way. When you do that, you inevitably get different answers, and those answers might lead you to wanting to hire the man more than the woman because of their answers. But their answers were based upon your questions or how you asked those. So structured interviews, hugely important to have the questions really well defined, and to do that in with knowing that you need to do this in a really formalized process so that you eliminate that discrimination. It's not just about not wanting to discriminate against women or people of color or something like that. It's also about making the right hire. When you ask the wrong questions, or you ask them in the wrong order, or you phrase them differently, you tend to do suboptimal hiring. You tend to hire people who actually aren't as good. You think they're the best candidate, but they're actually not, because you didn't give that best candidate the opportunity to really shine. Onboarding, same thing. Quite frankly, this is an area that College Recruiter has struggled with over the years because we've been fairly small. We're a lot better at it now over the last year or so because it's an area that we focused on. We now have a checklist when we hire new people. These are the systems that we have to give them access to. And we also have that similar document for offboarding. If somebody quits or they're terminated, then we go through, it's like we need to turn off their access to Google Workspace. So we don't forget, we gave them access to these things, now we need to remove them. If we give them access to Google Workspace for email, if they've never used Google Workspace, the corporate equivalent of Gmail, and they're used to a more legacy kind of a system, we need to teach them what threads are. We have some plugins. We need to teach them how to do that. We need to show them the college recruiter way for showing your calendar and sharing that with your coworkers, how we use Slack, what the channels mean, what goes into what areas. When you're communicating with customers, we always get back to them within a day, customers, vendors, partners. That kind of onboarding, that training, that showing them what their expectations are and then how to get that work done tends to be overlooked by a lot of small organizations. They tend to hire people that they think can hit the ground running, but this is a new entity for them. You've probably got new products, or at least significant differences between your products and maybe what they've sold or worked with in the past. And so you need to train them. It's when employees fail, it's almost always the fault of the leader, not the employee. The manager, which in this case is usually going to be the founder, didn't provide that employee with the tools, the training, et cetera, that they needed in order to succeed. So if you're a founder and you're churning through employees and you just can't keep people, they're never working out, they're quitting out of frustration, you're firing them for incompetence, what's the common denominator? I guarantee you it's not the 14 people that you've tried over the last year. It's something that you're doing. So look for improvement and make improvement yourself before pointing the finger at that poor employee. When you get to the next hurdle, that next step, what you're going to find is that there's all of a sudden you get into the 20, 25, 30 employee range. And this is when you start to get some real formalized HR practices. You probably have an HR person. They might be full-time, they might be part-time, they might be a contractor, a fractional HR person. You might work with an organization like what we work with, Insperity. And ADP does this, some other organizations do as well. Some of them are called PEOs, professional employee organizations. And basically they provide HR to small businesses. They do your payroll. They can help you with recruiting. They can help you with your employee handbooks. If there's a dispute or some charge of discrimination or something along those lines, they'll help. They do learning and development. Some of that's online, some of that's in-person classrooms, but it's kind of an outsourced HR department. I think organizations of usually at least 10, certainly by the time they get to 20, and easily into that 30 employee range can benefit greatly from a PEO. If you're in the US, if you're interested in sort of finding out more about Insperity, the organization that we've worked with for, I don't know, 12 years or something like that, again, shoot me an email. It's kind of beyond the scope of the presentation, but I can introduce them to you and give you some suggestions for who to talk to. When you get to this point, 20, 25, 30 employees, you tend to start to see that each of your employees has a formalized job title and a job description, which is different than a job posting ad. The ad is what brings them into the company, that attracts them to the company to apply to work for you. The job description is their duties. This is what's expected of them. It should be measurable. It should be objective. You shouldn't say something like that we want you to improve the efficiency of X, Y, and Z tasks or grow revenue. There should be a number associated with that. Increase revenue by 25% over the first 12 months of your employment with us, something along those lines. And then that, of course, should be updated as they stay with you. That clarity that objectivity so that they can look at that and you can look at that and they know if they're doing their job and you know if they're doing your job, hugely important. At College Recruiter, we use something called EOS, the entrepreneur's operating system. It was popularized by a book published by Gino Wickman called Traction, Get a Grip on Your Business. Again, don't sell it. We run our business that way. It gives a really, really good framework for companies of this size, even a little bit smaller, for how to run meetings, how to set agendas, how to define who does what work and how they're going to be evaluated. It's about bringing clarity to everybody so the employee always knows this is what's expected of them by their manager, by their coworkers. And if they hit that, if they achieve those milestones, then they know they've done a good job, and so does everybody else around them. One of the biggest dysfunctions in organizations is lack of clarity. I thought I was doing the right thing. I spent all week doing that, and then the next week, my boss yelled at me for wasting all that time last week. I thought that's what she wanted me to do. You should never have that situation. All employees should know at all times what they need to do, what's their highest priority, and when they've accomplished those tasks, and only when they've accomplished those tasks, move on to the second, the third, etc. At organizations of this size, you also start to see budgets for job posting ads, maybe recruitment agencies. That a recruitment agency might be like an executive headhunter where they find you, say, 3 of the best candidates out there, you interview them, you hire one of them, and then you pay that agency, that executive recruiting / headhunter, usually something in the range of 20 to 25% of their first year compensation. It could also be a staffing company where that employee is on the payroll of the other company, Manpower, Randstad, etc., and they work for you. So they come into your office, so they work for your company, but they're technically an employee of the staffing company. This is where you start to see organizations having budgets for that kind of thing. Recruiting is starting to become more formalized. It's becoming a function in the company, not just oh crap, Cindy quit, I need to replace her yesterday. And as a result of it becoming more formalized, you start to see more structured hiring. The founder may no longer be the person who's interviewing or even making the hiring decisions. That's what's happened at College Recruiter. In the last, I think, 3 years, I think I've interviewed no one. I'm not good at it. I don't like to do it. I tend to ask the wrong questions in the wrong orders, and I tend to wing it more. I'm like a lot of founders. I'm going to be more on that ADHD side where it's just sort of like, oh, this occurred to me, I should ask that. If you want to hire the best candidate, you need to be very thoughtful, planful, figure out what you want to ask them in advance and stick to that so that everybody goes through the same process. Onboarding, same thing. You tend to see more of a formal process, tends to be documented so that you know that these are the 12 steps. And I chose that deliberately. And then this is the order that we need to follow. And as you go through them, check, 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 so that you don't miss something. Now, as you scale up, this is almost always where you see the founder really backing out of HR. Again, very few founders are good at this. Very few founders like this. And so you tend to see them hiring a HR generalist. The head of technology or the head of sales will usually be the hiring manager. They will go to that HR person, that recruiter, the PEO, like an Insperity, like an ADP, and get that recruiting help. The C-suite person, your head of sales, your head of engineering, whoever it is probably involved in helping to write the job posting ad by talking with the recruiter about what skills, what attributes do you want, what do you not want. The recruiter puts that together. They go back to the hiring manager. Does this look right? Yes, it does. Let's post it at LinkedIn, Indeed, engineeringjobs.com, wherever the right places might be. The recruiter will screen the resumes and bring to the hiring manager usually just the well-qualified applicants. If you're looking to hire one person, that probably means 3, 4, 5 resumes will go to that head of sales, that head of engineering, the hiring manager. Very often, the first that the founder knows about who the organization is going to hire is when that C-suite person, that head of sales, goes to the founder and says, hey, Stephen, we just spent the last 2 months looking for a new account manager. As you know, we needed to hire somebody additional for sales. And so I found somebody, I extended an offer and they accepted it, and they start 3 weeks from today. That is kind of that point. And once you get above 30 employees, that becomes really common. It's very threatening. It's very distressing to a lot of founders to be out of the loop to that degree. But in order for your organization to scale, you want this. You want to embrace this. I got myself out with the full support of our C-suite people because, again, I'm bad at interviewing. I shouldn't be doing it. I should have people who are good at do what they do, and then I can do other things, spend my time on other things. These employees hired at this point too, 30, 40, 50 or more employees, you tend not to hire them based upon a need that you have today. Yeah, there's a need, and yeah, you're going to hire people as soon as you can, but you're also looking at these people from not just can they do the job today, but can they do the job as it will be a year from now, or the job as it will be 5 years from now. So you might hire, say, like a recent college grad to be an account executive, a salesperson, with the mindset of, I can see this person 2 years from now being like a team leader, a supervisor, or managing a couple of salespeople. And I could see them 5 years from now being our VP of sales. That you start to see more long-term outlook in hiring at this point. And then you also start to see more organizations, and especially once you get into the hundreds, using really dedicated talent acquisition and human resource technology products like an applicant tracking system, an ATS. Basically, it's usually, it's what candidates see is it's part of your website. That's where they go search for jobs. They apply online with a form. It goes into a database, and then recruiters, hiring managers, et cetera, can basically send each other that resume with notes, the disposition, the where that candidate is in the hiring process. You can use drop downs, you can use automated emails, but tools like that, you start to see them being more commonly used. You start to see tools like job distribution, programmatic advertising, CRMs, candidate relationship managers, employee branding products and tools. You start to see more investment in tools like that. And the reason why it starts to make sense when you have, say, 100 employees versus 2 is that the cost is the same if you have 100 versus 2. So it's effectively a 50th of the cost when you have 100 versus 2 people. So it becomes more economical. Now, some countries, US included, have certain thresholds for where your process legally needs to start to become very formalized, and where you have to be able to defend it. So in the US, there's an office of OFCCP. It's part of the US Department of Labor. What the OFCCP basically does is helps to ensure that employers that are federal contractors don't violate anti-discrimination laws. So saying to somebody, I'm not going to hire you because you're, Black and it's an accounting job, that is clearly discriminatory. And the OFCCP, if you're a federal contractor and they find out about it, they're going to come down on you pretty hard. You're going to get fined for that. Federal contractors in the US, it's pretty much any organization with 50 or more employees. So even if you aren't getting a check from Uncle Sam or from the federal government, you're probably still subject to OFCCP regulations. And the same is true in a lot of other countries. Some countries, it's a lower number. It might be 30. Some countries, it might be a higher number. It might be 100. But that is something to watch out for once you get into this level, is that you have to be able to defend. You can't just say, well, I hired them because they were the best candidate. How do you know they're the best candidate? What criteria did you use? What was the process? It's going to be up to you to prove that you hired the candidate because they were the best, not because they were a man or because they were, white or something along those lines. So hopefully that gives you kind of a good framework for looking at the different sizes that founders need to deal with. So let's talk for a few minutes about some of the other issues. Job ads. As an owner of a job board, I can tell you with absolute certainty that the overwhelming reason for one job ad succeeding versus another job ad, similar company, similar opportunity, why it fails is the job title. If you use something like sales representative, you're going to have more success than the company that posts basically the same ad with internal jargon like account executive. So use the job title that the candidate would use, even if that's different than what you use internally. You can always explain it in the job ad or when they interview with you. Location. If you post a location for the job that is in a large urban area, you are going to get more applicants than if it's in a rural area. So location matters. A lot of times that's within the control of the employer. So if you're operating a fully remote environment, you want to advertise that job widely and have it run under every location where you'd be willing to have that candidate sit, even if that location is different than your office. So if your office is in St. Louis, Missouri, but you would be willing to employ somebody in Orlando, Florida, you want to run that ad under Orlando, Florida, and anywhere else. If you're in the US and you're willing to have somebody running employed in that role like we are anywhere in the world, then you want to run that ad everywhere in the world. Again, budget permitting. But the number one thing that employers miss is salary. Employers think a lot of times that it's 1982 and that it's a secret and that they can use this for leverage. But if you don't disclose the salary range, then what's going to happen is you're going to get candidates who are grossly overqualified applying. They're looking for way more money than you can afford or what that rule justifies. And you're going to get candidates way under the scale where they don't have the right experience, the right credentials, and that's why they're willing to take a lot less money. These are very poorly qualified candidates. You don't want to spend your time on them, and you don't want them to spend their time on you. So include your salary. Huge differentiator. The first employer to respond to a candidate almost always is the one that hires them. If you're hiring an hourly employee for a restaurant and it takes you 3 weeks to get back to an applicant, that candidate has probably been working somewhere else for the last 2.5 weeks. And when you complain about why aren't they getting back to me, it's because they're working somewhere else. So your process needs to be fast. You should be able to go from somebody applying to evaluating them to scheduling an interview within hours. Not days or weeks, but hours. The actual interview should be within days. Your offer to that candidate should be within a day or two, and you should be ready for them to start as soon as you post that ad. Realistically, a lot of them can't because they're working someplace else. It might take them 2, 3, 4 weeks to be able to start with you, but you should be ready for them to be able to start. Paint a picture in your job ad. They should be able to read your job posting ad and understand, like, what would it look like to me to work there? Not just what my qualifications need to be, but large office, small office. Am I going to be working shoulder to shoulder with my boss? Is it fully remote? What does your office or restaurant look like? Who are the people on the team? Are they all very, very introverted, buttoned down, people who don't talk much and they're very serious? Nothing wrong with that. Paint a picture. Or are they all kind of artsy fartsy, we're blowing bubbles all day long and kind of collaborating in a very loosey-goosey manner? Again, nothing wrong with that. Paint that picture. Tell people what they can expect. You want to persuade candidates who read your job posting ad to apply to you. And you want to discourage candidates who aren't qualified from applying to you. You want the good candidates, the ones that are qualified, who are likely to say yes to apply, and you want those who aren't likely to get an offer, who aren't likely to say yes, to not apply at all. And so in your job posting ad, use both kind of language. If you look like this, we want you to apply. But if you've done this, or if you believe in this, don't. There's nothing wrong with that. And then the brand. It's okay for you not to be the leading company, to have the best process, to have the best offer. The first company with a good enough employer brand, like what you mean to the candidate, with a good enough process, how you hire them, how you interview them, and a good enough offer, the first one with it's good enough usually gets the hire. Now, as far as workplace policies, this is, again, usually where employers have at least 20, often 30, 40, 50 people. You want to be work with a lawyer. You want to work with an HR person to draft these, to have language that explicitly talks about how you're non-discriminatory, how you provide equal opportunities, and you want to follow that. Compensation should be fair. You should, if you're going to pay somebody less, a woman less to do a job than a man would do, that is wage theft. And what you're going to find is you're going to find that you're now eliminating half of the good workforce. It is so much more important to get the best employees, the ones who are with you the longest, who are the most productive, than to save a few dollars an hour by underpaying people, even if they'd be willing to take it. So your goal isn't to pay them as little as they would take. Your goal is to generate the best return on investment. So by having better employees, you're going to get more return. And sometimes your investment is going to be a little bit higher. You want to have an office that people aren't harassing each other, whether it's sexual or just saying inappropriate jokes or bullying. It's all part of health and safety. People need to go into a workplace knowing that this is a place they want to be. When they wake up in the morning, why do they want to come to work? And if they're coming to work only to pay their rent, that is somebody who's probably not going to be productive and who's not going to stay with you very long. But if they wake up in the morning saying, awesome, it's Monday, I get to go do this, that's somebody who's going to be highly productive. You've got to communicate openly with them and give them regular performance reviews. I see way too many organizations saying, oh, we do performance reviews once a year and it's this formalized written process. Daily, hourly, give people constant feedback. If they treated a customer well, give them a pat on the back. Way to go. I love to see what you did with that. If they screwed up in some way, then go back to the objective requirements for their job. Like, these are the things you're accountable for. This is what your expectations are. You didn't meet that. And, and here's the problem. Again, a lot of times it's a leadership issue. Most of the time, it's not an employee issue. They weren't trained properly. They weren't given the proper tools. That's on you. That's not on the employee. When employees do come to you with concerns, hey, Jim is bullying me. Cindy's being a jerk and sending around like porno videos and emails, whatever. You want to make sure that there isn't retaliation, that they can come to you as the founder if they are having a problem, and that you're not going to take it out on them doing the right thing for the organization. And learning and develop, you want employees to know that their careers can grow and they can grow, that they're not stuck in a role. The number one reason by far that especially young adults leave a place of work is no opportunity for advancement. They'll be with you for a year or two. They think there's a brick wall in front of them. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And they just feel like, I can't grow here, so I have to leave. Now you've just lost somebody who probably does a great job. They're fully trained. They quit on you, they leave you in the lurch, and you've got to go out and find somebody else. And there's a really good chance that that person that you find isn't going to work out. So it might be 6 months or a year before you find a good replacement. Much better to invest in that person who was with you already. In privacy, I've been in workplaces where managers think that because you go to them and you say, hey, I need to have surgery for blah, 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 that they can feel free to share that with everybody. No, they can't. That you need to be able to be discreet and be private. These are your employees. These are not people to be gossiping about. Now, the final slide before we leave off for questions is about transitioning. A lot of times I hear it from small businesses that we want to have contractors because they're cheaper. It's often true that they're cheaper, but kind of by definition, when you have a contractor versus an employee, you lose control. You can't require them contractor to do the same things as you can an employee, only working for you, working certain hours, using certain tools. You have more control or ability to provide learning and development to an employee versus a contractor. If you start to do a lot of learning and development for a contractor, you're kind of making them an employee, and then the government might come down on you because they don't get the payroll taxes from contractors. They want the payroll taxes, so they're going to want you to consider those people and pay them as employees. Benefits, hugely important to the vast majority of people in the US, health insurance and dental and stuff like that. But in every country, disability, life insurance, vision care, all those sorts of things. Those things they bind employees to employers. You can't really give that stuff to contractors. You can do that pretty easily with employees. So the more benefits you can afford, the longer people will be with you if they're employees. Employees tend not to quit or go or leave as quickly as contractors do. Contractors are often only with you for months, sometimes even just weeks. Employees tend to be with employers for many, many months, often years, sometimes decades. Taxes are easier if it's an employee. It's more regulated. It's easier to define, especially if you're using a payroll and benefits company, which we do, because to do it ourselves is too complex. By outsourcing it, piece of cake. And then you don't get employees coming back to you after a quarter or a year saying, oh, I had all these taxes that I wasn't expecting. I can't afford to work here anymore. And then there are legal protections also, and it cuts both ways. If it's a contractor, certain laws apply. If it's employees, other laws apply. It's more clear. You know better what's expected of you. And with contractors, that can be more blurry and run into problems. All of this stuff, at the end of the day, it's about recruitment and retention. It's about recruiting the best people, and it's about retaining them. Paul, if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to tackle those.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Very informative, very helpful. And we have a question from Tyler. I'm reading this now. With regards to interviews, we use a panel type approach with up to 5 one-on-one rounds, usually ascending up the engineering hierarchy. We are a company hiring mostly QA engineers, so looking for both culture fit and technical skills. Do you think that's appropriate, or are we going overboard there?
I think it depends on what you mean by panel, because when you said panel one-on-one, I can envision a panel being, there's one candidate, and in that one interview, there are, say, 5 people interviewing them. I don't see a problem with that as long as each panelist knows what order they should go in and exactly what their questions are. And you don't want to feel that you don't want to create a situation where the candidate feels ganged up on, overwhelmed, piled on by all these people like throwing questions at them. On the other hand, Tyler, if what you're talking about is they interview with one person and then a second interview with a second person and then a third interview with a third person, I would say that you are probably losing your best candidates, because most people don't want to go through 5 rounds of interviewing. They have the opportunity to get hired into a similar job with a similar employer for similar pay in a similar location and only have to go through 1 round of interviewing. So if you're doing like interview after interview after interview, you're making it really unpleasant for the candidate and probably dragging the process out for many days longer than it needs to be. And so you're going to be losing the best people. A couple of years ago, it was a terrible mistake, but we subjected somebody to 8 interviews, way too many. We lost him, and it was a real bummer. I'm still bummed that we lost this guy, because he would have been fantastic in our environment, and we put him through a process we never should have. So don't do that.
All right, so we have a question from Hiram Salazar. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. I have seen different points of views when it comes to give feedbacks to candidates that are not selected. Is it a good thing to give appropriate feedback, or is it something the recruiter have the right to keep within the company?
Great question. And the answer is it depends. So let's say you post a job ad and you get 50 people applying and 45 of them do not even get interviewed. You do not, I don't think any reasonable person would expect you to kind of have a formal written or even oral communication with those 45 people as to why they didn't move forward. They've invested almost no time in you. You need to invest almost no time in them. However, once they get to the interview stage, I do think that it's good for your brand and good for hiring people in the future that you do reciprocate. If that candidate has spent an hour interviewing with you, you should spend 5 or 10 minutes talking with them candidly about why they didn't move on. It doesn't have to be negative about the candidate. It shouldn't be negative. Don't say things like, well, you don't have an MBA. Instead, say something like, you were well qualified. That's why I interviewed you. However, you weren't as well qualified as the person we hired. She had an MBA. You have an undergraduate degree. It also sends a powerful message to that candidate that you probably liked them. They probably just weren't the best candidate. Maybe a year from now or 3 years from now, they will have attained those additional criteria. They do get that MBA. Then they're going to come back to you. So just because you say no to somebody today doesn't mean you'd say no to them 2 years from now, or their best friend or their cousin. So if you provide good, constructive, candid feedback, you're actually going to get referrals from people that you've said no to. And that becomes really powerful for recruitment.
Okay, all right. So Matthew said just thanks for the information. And we have 2 minutes left. I see the only one with the camera on is Vala. Do you have a question?
No, I really enjoyed Steven's talk. I'm also in hiring, and I have a company and which helps startups recruit, and we are more like an agency. He covered the points very, very well, and I really love the first point he made of what founders do of trying to recruit within their network.
Mm.
I think that's a very risky move, especially for early hires, because firing somebody whom you know well is very hard, and I can't imagine how many sleepless nights founders have at that, of dealing with that situation. It's a very difficult situation.
I can tell you from personal experience, it was hundreds of sleepless nights.
Yeah.
I had to fire somebody who was one of my best friends, and it cost us our friendship. But for the company, it also meant that I delayed firing him for months.
Yeah.
It was the wrong because if he hadn't been such a close friend, I would have just like, hey, this isn't working out. You need to go and you're great, not in our environment, that you need to go and find a job in a better environment, and we need to hire somebody who's better. Yeah.
Oh, that was excellent, and I think I just also had some thoughts on the question which the QA on QA hiring and the panel. Is it okay if I share that?
Hey, Paul's the boss. I'm good with it.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. So my thought would be, every organization has to fit their hiring process to their needs. So there is no universal formula which is going to work. And the best thing what I would do is that have a feedback loop. Look at how your hires turned out. And if your hire turned out bad, it's not the hires, it's not the candidate's fault. And as Steve pointed out, it's the founder's fault. So go back and see what went wrong. Do a postmortem, see whether your hiring process is right. And if you're able to hire good QA engineers with your hiring process, your process is good. There is nothing wrong. It's working well. Look at what percentage of mishires you get. And I can tell you mishires are as high as what I have seen in the industry. It's probably close to 25%, especially in early stage startups. And a lot of mishires get hidden because nobody wants to act on it. Nobody wants to bell the cat. So hiring is extremely difficult. So look at that. And if you're probably doing mishires less than 10%, I think you're most likely doing very well. And if it's an so look at your process, see how many of your employees are doing well. Look at their performance reviews after 1 year. If the performance reviews after 1 year are not that great, which means your hiring has gone bad. And then you need to see what's wrong with and why the hiring went bad. It could be because it could be various reasons. Your panel structure could be right, but you may not be having the right panelists who don't have. Then that's so it doesn't mean that your panel is working badly. Do you have the right panelists? In the panel, is somebody's opinion overweighting everybody else's opinion? What happened? So there are no simple answers, unfortunately. It's complicated. It's a very complex process. You have to do your own postmortem and figure it out. I for every case where we say that, there is a truth, there is the opposite, which is also the truth.
But Bala, I love what you said. And, just to add to that, one thing that a lot of small organizations feel, those run by founders, is they get frustrated at times that, well, how can we hire this software engineer when, she might go to Google, right? How can we compete with a big organization? And what we need to remember, regardless of the organization, the size or whatever we work in, is that every organization has its pros and cons, its strengths and its weaknesses. One thing that founder-run organizations are way stronger at than large organizations is actually knowing where they hired people from. When you get into an organization where you're hiring hundreds or thousands a year, a lot of times the data on who you're sourcing, who's responding to your ads is disconnected to your payroll system. And if your payroll system doesn't tie in, you literally don't know, as a big organization, that, well, we hired Paul and Paul's a rock star, but we have no idea where we got him from. You can do that kind of individually, and you could go back that. But to say, okay, we hired 500 software engineers in the last year, where did they come from generally, is something most large organizations can't do. Small organizations, you're going to remember, oh, Paul saw my ad on Indeed, and then he contacted my co-founder who said, hey, I think we should interview Paul. And then it's like, okay, that means we need to advertise. The next time we want to hire someone like Paul, we need to advertise that on Indeed. And I need to listen to my co-founder.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And what you're basically saying is that you need to look at your mishires and also your rock stars, and have a feedback loop. What's working and what's not working. Totally agree.
Well, thank you. Anybody wants to follow up with me afterwards? Contact information is up there. Feel free to shoot me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, whatever.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Well, thank you, Bala. And Stephen, thank you so much. And actually, we have also Henry and Tyler said thanks to you. And thank you, everyone, members and guests who joined the call, this webinar. We appreciate you, and have a great day to everyone. Take care.
Cheers.